Charles adjusted his tie and walked into Sterling Heights Bank with a clear sense of confidence. He had scheduled an appointment with Alexandra for 11 a.m. to discuss a business loan, a crucial step for the project he had been nurturing for years. Inside the bank, an atmosphere of luxury and cold authority filled the space, radiating an undeniable sense of power. The interior was adorned with premium leather furniture, gleaming marble floors, and a soft golden glow from vintage chandeliers, creating an air of solemn prestige. The faint scent of espresso from an expensive coffee machine lingered throughout, mingling with the elegant perfumes of wealthy clients engrossed in signing contracts or discussing finances with well-dressed advisors. Charles approached the reception desk where Adeline, a blonde woman with a forced smile, greeted him with a distant look. After confirming his appointment, she gestured toward the seating area by the window without a single courteous word. Charles nodded in thanks and took a seat, choosing a chair that gave him a clear view of the grand lobby. He observed every gesture, every conversation around him, and couldn't help but notice the invisible divide between him and the other patrons. Men in tailored suits, women carrying designer handbags, and the way they confidently walked past the frosted glass doors without needing any explanation. It all radiated a sense of belonging. Charles thought about the journey that had led him to this place, but what he didn't realize was the challenge waiting just ahead. Charles checked his watch, noting that it was 5 minutes past 11. He reassured himself that delays happened, especially at a bank like Sterling Heights, where money and power dictated the flow of time. He watched as polished executives breezed through the lobby, their laughter echoing softly against the marble walls. They moved with an ease that came from knowing they belonged. Charles shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly against his briefcase. He had been in boardrooms before, had closed deals with people who thought they were untouchable. Yet, sitting here, he felt an unease that wasn't about the meeting itself but about the way he was being made to wait. As the minutes ticked by, Charles noticed a pattern. A man in a gray suit arrived, exchanged a few words with Adeline, and within moments, a young banker escorted him past the frosted glass doors. Then a woman in a chic beige blazer entered, her smile bright and effortless. She barely finished her casual chat with Adeline before being led inside as if the doors simply opened at her command. Charles's name remained uncalled. At 11:30, irritation simmered beneath his calm exterior. He had confirmed his appointment twice, there was no excuse for this. Yet people who had walked in long after him were being ushered in without delay. Charles stood and approached the desk once more, keeping his tone steady. "Has Alexandra been informed that I'm here?" he asked. Adeline barely glanced up, her fingers tapping lazily on the keyboard. "She knows. She's finishing up with another client," she replied, her voice flat and dismissive. Charles waited for a follow-up, an apology, a time frame, any sign that his presence mattered. None came. Instead, she resumed her work, clearly unbothered. Just then, Charles witnessed it again. A woman in a designer dress walked in, chatting on her phone. Adeline's demeanor changed instantly, her smile warmer, her voice more welcoming. Moments later, the woman was escorted inside without hesitation. It wasn't just about waiting. It was about the quiet message behind the wait, that some people mattered more than others. Charles returned to his seat, his jaw tightening. He knew this game had seen its subtlety before. It was the kind of power play that hid behind politeness, cloaked in scheduling issues and busy mornings. But Charles wasn't just another name on a list, and he certainly wasn't going to be treated like one. By noon, Charles's patience had worn thin. He stood once more, his shoulders squared as he approached Adeline's desk. "I've been waiting for over an hour," he stated, his voice calm but firm. "I had an appointment at 11. Is there an issue I should know about?" Adeline looked up, her eyes betraying a flicker of annoyance. "As I said, Ms. Alexandra is occupied. You'll be seen when she's ready," she replied, her words clipped, her gaze already drifting back to her computer screen. Charles opened his mouth to respond but paused, his eyes narrowing as he watched her demeanor shift once more. A man in an expensive navy suit approached, his presence radiating confidence. Adeline's smile was instant, warm, inviting, even flirtatious. "Mr. Thompson, so good to see you again," she beamed, standing up to shake his hand. "Ms. Alexandra has been expecting you. Right this way." Charles watched in silence as they disappeared behind the frosted glass doors. It wasn't just about preference, it was about priority, about who was deemed worthy of respect. His chest tightened with anger, a familiar sensation he had learned to suppress in rooms just like this one. It was the unspoken hierarchy, the kind that sorted people before they even opened their mouths. And Charles knew exactly where he had been placed today. Determined not to be dismissed, Charles walked to the window, his eyes tracing the skyline. He steadied his breathing, letting the anger settle into focus. This meeting was too important. He needed Alexandra to see the potential of his proposal, to understand that his business wasn't just viable, it was valuable. But to get there, he first needed to be seen as more than just an inconvenience in the lobby. Charles straightened his tie, the gesture a reminder of who he was and how far he had come. If they thought he would back down, they were wrong. He had faced bigger challenges than this, and he wouldn't allow Adeline's thinly veiled bias to undermine his work. Not today. He took his seat once more, his resolve solidifying. They could keep him waiting, but they wouldn't make him invisible. Another hour slipped by, the ticking of the clock grating on Charles's patience. He glanced around the waiting area, its minimalist decor now feeling cold and unwelcoming. Just as he considered leaving, the frosted glass doors opened, and Alexandra finally stepped out, her stride confident and composed. Her eyes scanned the room before landing on him. "Mr. Charles, I apologize for the wait. Please come in," she said, her voice polite but detached. Charles stood, his posture steady, concealing the frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. As he followed her into the spacious office, his eyes quickly took in the polished mahogany desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows boasting a breathtaking cityscape, and the pristine white couches that looked more for display than comfort. Alexandra gestured toward one of the chairs facing her desk. "Please have a seat." He settled into the chair, his back straight, maintaining a composed demeanor. Alexandra sat across from him, crossing her legs with poised elegance. "I understand you're here to discuss a potential partnership," she began, her voice professional, but there was a distance in her tone that didn't go unnoticed. Charles met her gaze, his expression resolute. "Yes. I believe our collaboration could be mutually beneficial. I've prepared a detailed proposal that outlines how my company's approach can complement your firm's current strategy." He handed her the folder, his fingers steady despite the irritation simmering beneath his skin. Alexandra took the folder, flipping through it with practiced efficiency. "I see," she murmured, her face giving away nothing. But then, just for a moment, her eyes lingered on his name at the top of the document, her expression flickering before she regained her composure. Charles didn't miss it. He had seen that look before. The subtle judgment, the calculation, the unspoken question of whether he belonged in this room at all. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I'm confident our collaboration would yield significant growth for both sides. I'm willing to answer any questions you might have." He leaned forward slightly, his determination unyielding. Charles wasn't just here to pitch an idea. He was here to prove that he was more than just another name to be overlooked. Alexandra closed the folder, placing it on her desk with a calculated slowness. Her fingers rested on its cover, tapping rhythmically as she maintained her poised demeanor. "Your proposal is thorough," she began, her voice even, "but I have concerns about whether your company can meet our standards." Her words were polished, carefully crafted to sound professional, yet they carried an unmistakable edge. Charles's spine stiffened, his face an impenetrable mask of calm. "I assure you my team is more than capable. We've consistently exceeded industry benchmarks, and I have the data to prove it." His voice remained steady, his confidence unwavering. But beneath his composed exterior, anger coiled like a tightening spring. He could read between the lines. He knew this was about more than metrics and performance. It was about him. Alexandra leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting momentarily to the city skyline before returning to him. "It's not just about numbers, Mr. Charles. It's about compatibility. We need to ensure that any partnership aligns with our company's image and values." Her eyes flickered, her meaning clear even though she didn't say it outright. Charles felt the familiar sting of indignation, his jaw clenching as he kept his expression neutral. Image and values. He knew exactly what she meant. The silent judgment, the coded language that said he didn't fit their mold. It was the same prejudice he had faced time and time again, no matter how successful he became. He leaned forward, his voice firm but controlled. "My company's values are rooted in excellence and integrity, just like yours. If you're concerned about alignment, let's address that directly. I'm here to discuss business, not perceptions." The air between them grew taut, the tension palpable. For the first time, Alexandra's polished mask faltered, surprise flickering in her eyes before she quickly recovered. "I see," she said slowly, her voice softer, almost cautious. Charles held her gaze, his determination unbroken. He wasn't just fighting for a contract. He was fighting against the unspoken biases that had tried to define him his entire life. And he wasn't backing down. Christopher paced his office, his frustration mounting with each step. He had underestimated Charles, that much was clear. The man was relentless, refusing to be pushed aside. Christopher could feel his carefully constructed plans unraveling, and it infuriated him. How had it come to this? He had always been the one in control, pulling strings from the shadows while maintaining his polished public image. But Charles was different, resilient, sharp, and unyielding. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Adeline entered, her expression troubled. "We have a problem," she announced, her voice low. "Charles isn't backing down. He's challenging every roadblock we've put up, and he's gaining support. People are starting to listen to him." Christopher's eyes narrowed. "Then we make sure they stop listening." His voice was cold, his mind already calculating his next move. "Dig deeper. Find something we can use to discredit him. Everyone has skeletons in their closet." Adeline hesitated, her gaze wavering. "I've looked. There's nothing substantial, nothing that would stick. He's clean." The admission tasted bitter, and for a brief moment, doubt flickered across her face. But she quickly buried it, knowing that Christopher would never tolerate weakness. Christopher's jaw tightened, his frustration boiling over. "Then create something. Plant the doubt. It doesn't have to be true, it just needs to be believable enough to smear his name." He turned to face her fully, his eyes cold and calculating. "If he wants a fight, then we'll give him one he can't win." Adeline nodded, her expression guarded as she left the room. Once outside, she leaned against the wall, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her orders. She had always known Christopher was ruthless, but this was different. This was personal. She glanced down the hallway, her mind racing. Charles wasn't just challenging their business, he was challenging their entire narrative. And Christopher would destroy him for it. Inside, Christopher stood by his window, staring out at the city below. His grip tightened on the glass he was holding, his knuckles turning white. He wouldn't lose, not to Charles, not to anyone. He had built his empire on power and manipulation, and he wasn't about to let it crumble now. Charles sat at his desk, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. The campaign against him was relentless, each new accusation more vicious than the last. False rumors spread like wildfire, and every day his name was dragged through the mud. He knew Christopher was behind it. The man's fingerprints were all over this smear campaign. But knowing and proving were two very different things. And without proof, Charles was left defending himself against shadows. Adeline watched from a distance, guilt churning in her stomach. She had followed Christopher's orders, planting the seeds of doubt and watching them grow into scandalous headlines. But each lie felt like another chain wrapping around her conscience. She had justified it to herself, insisting it was just business, nothing personal. But seeing Charles, a man who once trusted her, standing alone against a storm she helped create was too much to bear. Meanwhile, Alexandra was furious. She had warned Charles about going after Christopher, knowing the man's capacity for cruelty. But Charles wouldn't listen, driven by his unshakable belief in justice and truth. Now she watched helplessly as his reputation crumbled. She confronted him, her voice breaking with frustration. "Why didn't you just walk away? Why did you have to provoke him?" Charles looked at her, his eyes weary but resolute. "Because someone has to stand up to him. If not me, then who?" His words hung heavy in the air, the weight of his conviction undeniable. Alexandra's anger faltered, replaced by a painful understanding. But Christopher wasn't finished. He wanted Charles utterly destroyed, humiliated and broken. He orchestrated a public scandal, fabricating evidence of corruption and betrayal. News outlets ran with the story, painting Charles as a villain. His allies began to distance themselves, his support crumbling before his eyes. Charles felt the ground slipping from beneath him, the life he had built falling apart. But even as the world turned against him, he refused to bow to Christopher's intimidation. He knew the truth and he would fight to make sure everyone else knew it too. Charles stood before the cameras, his face a mask of calm determination despite the chaos swirling around him. The press conference was his chance to fight back, to reclaim his narrative from Christopher's lies. Reporters shouted questions, their voices sharp and accusatory, echoing the scandals that had plagued him for weeks. Charles took a breath, steadying himself. He knew the truth was his greatest weapon, but delivering it required courage. "I stand here today not just to defend my name, but to expose the corruption that's poisoning our system," Charles declared, his voice unwavering. He laid out the facts methodically, revealing Christopher's manipulation and deceit. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall of truth he was building, shielding himself from the falsehoods that threatened to bury him. Adeline watched the broadcast, her heart racing. Guilt gnawed at her, each word from Charles a reminder of her role in his suffering. She had the power to end this, to shatter Christopher's scheme with the truth she held. But doing so would mean betraying Christopher, and risking everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, Alexandra sat in the audience, pride and fear warring within her. Charles was fighting back, but she knew Christopher wouldn't go down quietly. The man was ruthless, and this public defiance would only provoke his wrath. Christopher watched from his office, rage twisting his features. Charles was supposed to be broken by now, but instead he was fighting back with more strength than ever. Christopher's eyes narrowed, his mind already crafting his next move. If Charles wanted war, then war he would get. The story of Charles, Adeline, Alexandra, and Christopher teaches powerful lessons about integrity, courage, and the consequences of deceit. Charles's resilience in the face of lies reminds us that truth is the most potent weapon against injustice. His determination to fight back, even when falsely accused, shows the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter how overwhelming the opposition. Adeline's struggle with guilt highlights the heavy burden of complicity and the courage needed to make amends. Her journey urges us to take responsibility for our actions and speak the truth, even when it's difficult. Alexandra's loyalty and support demonstrate the impact of standing by loved ones during their darkest moments. Christopher's downfall serves as a stark reminder that deceit and manipulation may offer temporary power but ultimately lead to ruin. In a world filled with challenges and temptations, staying true to one's values is the path to genuine success and peace.